Well, welcome. This is Catacombs. I'm David LaMorte. I'm the artist behind all of this work here at M Galleries P&A, curated by Frank May. Welcome. Catacombs itself is the culmination of a 10-year experiment and a year-long test of my mental health and patience. In all seriousness, this show is an exploration and attempt to take a creative idea to its logical conclusion. And a quote by Jean Darnielle, "I'm going to make it through this year if it kills me." The Paper Skulls started as an experiment, actually. In about, I want to say 2009, I recently found a sketchbook with a really rudimentary and really complicated design and had to build a little skull box from 2009. And part of it was because I was using the skull as a nom de plume. Because of my last name meaning the death in Italian and French, I thought, oh, a skull would be great. I could be La Skull. Just like almost like a tag. It's actually something I use for my stickering as well, but that's a whole nother show. This has a lot to do with my last name, and also I was like, I worked a lot with paper, and I've worked with paper since 2001, so it just seemed like a very logical next step is to try and do something with the skull and the paper. And I thought it'd be a fun way of making myself, the skull, part of the work. I thought of them, actually, the original idea was I was going to use them as boxes to contain other things, or as a mask. And and for a while I was using them just as the base of sculptures. Actually, a bunch of those pieces were in a previous show at M Galleries downtown. I spent a lot of time engineering and messing around with the shapes and the forms of the skulls, trying to cut down on cutting time, cutting down on building time, and trying to cut down on the amount of paper I used. And you can tell over time they would change shape. And eventually I kind of settled on this palm size, although there are a few skulls here. Although honestly, I have not made a skull larger than like the human size in at least like a year. So those two up there are probably the largest ones I've made. I made a mask size one recently, but mostly the only, like the 2,000 I made this year are all fairly small. But I don't know how many I made previously, but they were all a little bit bigger than this. I wanted to really simplify it because I had found a Japanese origami artist who kind of came up with a better idea than my skull design, but his was, well, technically it's not even origami, it's kirigami because he was cutting them. And then he wanted to use water to shape the cheekbones, and I was like, if I'm going to be doing this, I'm not sitting at my desk at work with a cup of water. This is insane. So I kind of kept trying to like break it down more and more and more. I really wanted to simplify because I didn't want to, I wanted to make it with as few pieces as possible, trying to like maximize production, I guess, in some way. Even now, I'm still trying to streamline the process. Usually when I cut these, I'll cut them like 5 to 10 at a time. So in some ways, the skull kind of stands in as a human form without having to be a human form. For the artists out there who know, when you draw people always have an opinion about the way they look when you're drawing them, and it's always terrible. They're always telling you, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? I'm like, well, why don't you just make you a different person? Because people are very, self-conscious, and also you don't want to insult people. So I was always a little self-conscious about the way I draw, and I also noticed that most of the people I draw look a little bit like me for some reason. So the skull was a way of trying to capture the human form without having to actually deal with another human. And I really love the idea of multiples. Always used multiples in my work because if you have a piece, I want to say that Anne McCowan came up with this, papermaker from Rutgers University, my papermaking professor it's not the RCIPP anymore, it's the, what's the print department at Rutgers called again? The Judy something?
Judith Brodsky?
The Brodsky Center. Used to say that if you make one thing and you don't have an idea what it means, just make 100 more and eventually it'll mean something. And I took that pretty hard and I ran with it, and still to this day. Also, I kind of love the idea that they're like cute and a little bit creepy. I've always loved that dichotomy of things that are kind of gross but also kind of adorable. It might be just because being a parent and having to work with kids all day, they're both cute and creepy at the same time. But it's also like anything else, like death in life isn't an inevitability, but in a funny way, it's like death. How do we learn to live with it? You know, and so this is what I'm trying to do. Although I'm not actually collecting bones. I know there are a lot of artists who use and incorporate bones into their work. I kind of wanted to make everything what do you call it? The tyrant in me wants to be able to do everything on his own. So that's a little bit why these are all paper. I kind of been moving away from the skull because I've made like 10,000 or so of them, and I feel like, hey, maybe I should move on. And then I made a crown the day of the opening in like 30 minutes, and I realized I had a problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pieces where I'm trying to move away from the skull later on. I do answer anything. So I think the biggest question I often get about this work is it meditative? And I think it would be meditative if you're like me and you find meditation both stressful and kind of relaxing at the same time. I have a lot of trouble meditating. I often fall asleep, which I'm told is okay. But I've been really focusing on trying to meditate, and there's nothing that makes my anxiety peak more than realizing that I'm sitting doing nothing for more than a couple minutes. And so, although I know people seem to I know meditation can slowly change your brain, and I'm hoping it'll eventually kick in on me. I do find these kind of meditative, the idea of making each one being this like calm, repetitive task, but they're also a little bit stressful because when I make these, I don't have a set template. I usually use another skull as the template for the next set of 5 to 10. So if the transfer process doesn't work, or if I'm distracted, or the scissors break, which happens more and more lately, it can really affect things. I mean, you can even I can even tell you just by looking at them which ones were on the outside of the fold or the inside of the fold based on the size of the noses. So I guess we should probably address the elephant in the room. This is Boney the puppet. I'm so used to working with children who are constantly asking me questions while I'm answering the questions they just asked me that I thought, hey, I should have someone here to act as the audience, ask the questions that I want someone to ask me, but I might not necessarily have thought to tell Frank to ask me. So I thought, oh, what a puppet. That's like an insane thing, right? Like I can't talk for myself. I'm going to speak through the puppet, right? Like where it was. Oh, so yes, but there's nothing greater than hearing your 12-year-old tell their friends, oh yeah, my dad's got a basement full of skulls. And then I'm like, made out of paper? He goes, don't tell them that part. That part's not as scary. I'm like, all right, whatever, kid. But yeah, I mean, essentially, like, this is kind of an experiment that I've just taken to its end conclusion. And like, anyone who's familiar with my artwork knows that I basically take whatever idea I'm doing and I grind it into the dust until I have to run screaming from it, and then I start doing it again 6 months later, so we'll see. Because I have a feeling eventually I'll get an itch and I'll start painting dollars again, but you know, this is just the way it goes. Oh yeah, catacombs literally comes from the arrangement of skulls in Europe, and particularly large cities like Paris and I think Rome. There was a certain point where all of the, especially like the lower classes, so many cemeteries were filled with people, and that they were running out of room in the cities to actually bury people. So what would eventually happen is, as bodies decayed, either they'd be put into an ossuary, or sometimes those bones, particularly if there's not people of note or people of means, would be used to build like catacombs. And some of it's just an inevitability of just generations of people being born on top of generations, on top of generations, on top of generations. We don't really have that problem here in the United States because of the amount of space we have. We don't really need to use bones to build things yet. And now we can legally be composted, so that's kind of neat. I'm kind of excited about that. I want someone to use me on their potted plants, I guess, or something. Their house plants would be great, but I don't know if that's how it works. But whatever, boy can dream. And I just thought like, oh, this is obvious. It's gonna look like a catacombs because I've been making so many of these skulls. I had a bunch of them hanging in a show in Staten Island and a show in Metuchen, and I was like, it kind of feels like a catacombs. Me and all my friends here. But I don't see it as like a negative thing, or I don't feel it as like, I feel like these are actually super upbeat. Because that's just the kind of guy I am. Because to me, they're not particularly photorealistic skulls. They don't really look like skulls that much. They kind of look like a skull, but also they're all smiling. It's kind of like the attitude of the Day of the Dead, where for the Day of the Dead in the parts of the states in Mexico where they actually celebrate it, the skeleton's seen as a happy character because they're always smiling. Because like when you smile, you show your teeth. Well, skeletons always showing their teeth. There are no lips. So they kind of look like happy little characters, and that's kind of how I see them. So that's kind of always been my attitude about the whole damn thing. Every I'm gonna just kind of thank you. Everything I've ever done, I'm basically stealing from other artists and doing it in my own way. I just think that's the nature of making art in 2023. There's no new idea, and anyone thinks they're doing anything new and innovative loves the smell of their own farts, probably. It's a matter of trying to interpret things. I mean, I even will joke with Frank often that I'm basically a turd polisher. Like, I'll take an idea that's dumb, and I'm like, well, how do I make this into an actual thing? And this is not unprecedented. There's a whole Japanese art of taking cow pies and polishing them into these beautiful brown orbs.
Oh wow, so it's literally.
Yeah, like I'm literally honestly, a lot of these, you'll even see some of these are like discarded from drawings I did with my students during COVID, or they're like excess. Like I'm literally taking trash and turning it into something so I don't feel so bad about dumping so much crap into a landfill anymore. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is eventually going to go into a landfill. I'm going to probably eventually go into a landfill. So, I mean, it all happens. Que sera, sera. I think part of me is always worried that people are using the skull to represent their rebel motorcycle club or their some Facebook group, and they think about what's the skull doing, not how the skull is feeling. And I do appreciate how many of them there are, because this is clearly a sign of deep-seated mental health issues and avoidance of actual responsibilities. Although I have not met them, I'm pretty sure David has children and a job that are being neglected clearly, because look at all these things. I will confirm I do have children and a job. I don't think my children feel neglected, but I haven't asked them that flat out. So.
I think you sound a lot like Dave, Bonnie. So just saying, your voice.
There's always a little bit of the artist in the art, Frank. And also, I'm not doing this the whole time. I think actually, maybe I should just do this the whole time. It's a little crazy. I'm not a performer. In all seriousness, the skull is lame and played out as a symbol. I think it represents more about the memento mori, the inevitability of our finite time in the universe, and I don't take that lightly. Also, he's not the first idiot to take the symbol and run with it. He will certainly never be the last. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's as honest as I can be. I mean, idiot warmly. I appreciate that. Yeah, idiot warmly, thank you. And I thought, it'd be kind of interesting and almost catacomb-like if I put a bunch of them next to each other and kind of built like a bas-relief on the wall. And actually, I was doing that for a while when I was showing in Jersey City. A lot of paper cuts mounted to like a matrix of skulls. And then eventually I started doing epoxy pieces, like glow-in-the-dark sculptures and using like two-part epoxies. So I was doing the skulls with that, but then it just felt kind of wasteful. The idea of like, I don't know, there's a certain point where when you're making art, you're like, well, what is going to happen to this when I'm dead? And I'm constantly thinking about this all the time. It might be because of the skulls. Like, what am I doing with this, right? Like, I have a stack of, I've gone through 11 sketchbooks this year. In 2022, I mean. I went through 11 sketchbooks. I'm already on page 40 of the sketchbook I started New Year's Eve. So I'm just thinking to myself, what are my children going to do? Who am I burdening this with when I leave this mortal coil? And I know a lot of people who work in like, or volunteer their time with like local historical societies, and sometimes you'll get like, they'll use people's journals from certain periods as like first-hand accounts of historical time periods. But my sketchbooks are mostly filled with skulls, so I don't really know how much that's going to say about the early aughts. Actually, you know what? Maybe that's exactly what it needs to say. I don't know. And it's also just trying to figure out where my artwork fits in the whole dichotomy of American society and pop culture and art. Oh, the art world is crazy. The art world is crazy. It's essentially becoming a place for laundering money, where rich people open these stores and they put this word museum on the label, like it's not a store and you can't buy and sell everything in that place. And the prices are arbitrarily set by cabals of curators and art collectors. I'm like, oh, you know, you sound like a conspiracy theorist. Yes, it is a conspiracy, but it's an actually founded conspiracy. What? You've never heard of the Warhol Foundation? Go on. Well, so there's a cabal of there is a cabal of Warhol owners, and I'm using the word cabal with a little bit of jokiness. Getting back to the Warhol thing. So when a Warhol goes on sale, there's always a group of people who are watching that sale because the prices set from current, current sales determine the values of the Warhols in collections held in private collections. So there are certain people who will not let a Warhol sell for any lower than whatever the threshold they deem appropriate. This is because they have amassed amount of Warhols that if the value of their Warhol swung 20 to 30%, they could basically lose millions of value, and a lot of wealthy people may not be displaying their Warhols necessarily, although they often donate them temporarily to museums, but they do borrow against them a lot. A lot of, there's all kinds of websites you can join now to basically invest, quote unquote, invest in large pieces of artwork. And now I'm but a peon, a peasant, if you will. So if I gave them my $30, hopefully if I gave my $30 to a Basquiat painting, hopefully as the value of Basquiat, I might be able to maybe like get $35 out of it. But if I'm trying to buy a mansion based on the value of my extensive Warhol collection, I don't want that value to dip, because then I won't be able to have the liquidity or the money to actually borrow again. So about a year ago, I was asked to be part of this thing called Windows of Understanding, which is a municipal art project between New Brunswick, Highland Park, and Metuchen, New Jersey, where businesses would allow artists to put artwork in their windows, and the artwork was there to bring awareness to different participating nonprofits and community organizations. So I got linked up with the Metuchen Food Bank, it turned out to be really great, actually. I was a little skeptical, being someone who ran from the Catholic Church as fast as I could. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna work with the church, I'm gonna work with the church. I'm like, well, you like food pantries, you donate to food pantries all the time. So I created a large heart-shaped painting, and I worked really closely with the director of the food pantry, Sarah Teddy, who's actually a friend of mine from Rutgers. And so I basically made a large anatomical heart, which has been kind of a staple in my work, as in an effort to try and get away from the skulls, using the colors of the packaging of some of the items that the shoppers would use or take with them from the food pantry. And I'm saying shoppers because that's the word the food pantry uses for the people who receive donations. They get a little shopping cart. They go in, they go through the food pantry essentially, and they pick out certain items. Certain shelves are limited, but then other shelves they can take as much as they want. And it almost feels like being in like your local neighborhood bodega. And I kind of loved like the humanity built into the system. So I made a shopping cart, and I made a giant anatomical heart with packaging for all the different ventricles and arteries and veins and stuff. And so I kind of kept with that as a symbol, because I was trying to think of like, how could I represent the human form without doing the skull, because the skull is definitely overdone. A lot of people use skulls. There's like the Skull-A-Day guy. There's an actual dude from Highland Park called Skullboy, very nice guy, actually, a really good artist. And so like, I'm not the only one doing it. I'm not really bringing anything new to this. So I thought, well, maybe I should try and shift away from it. And I thought the heart was a great way of doing it, because literally it's the thing pumping the blood, keeping you alive. As much as you need your bones for white blood cells and for structure and for brain protection and stuff like that. So I started doing the heart, and it's been kind of a staple in my work ever since. And actually, it'll be the anniversary of the unveiling of that painting in about 2 or 3 days. So it's kind of fun that we're here right now. It's a really fun project if you can check it out, Windows of Understanding. They do different murals. Mostly it's projects in the windows of businesses, but sometimes it's actually on the windows. It's a lot of fun. I don't really know what they're doing this year, because I'm not part of it this year, but it was really an interesting piece. And so I thought, oh, since I've had all these little individual, I don't know what we call them, motifs, each skull being its own separate piece of a pattern, I thought, oh, I can use them like pixels and build pictures out of them. There's actually another piece, an alien that I built out of bright green and black, and then this was the heart. This one was actually a lot nicer. Just trying to show the anatomical heart. The heart itself, right, is kind of also a symbol kind of used by the Catholic Church to hold the, not the Lady of Guadalupe. That's actually, I'm working on a painting of the Virgin Mary, so I'm kind of got that on my mind. And so I kind of like the idea of using the actual anatomical heart, because like, we talk about, things being heartfelt, and, I give my heart to things. Well, like, let's see it. Show me your heart, right? And usually it's a positive sign, unless someone in Indiana Jones is pulling it out of your chest. But you get the idea. Oh, I work in almost everything. Right now, it's been a lot of paper and digital. I do a lot of stickers. I actually have a sticker subscription company where you can pay me and I send you stickers every month.
It's a Patreon, right?
Yeah, and I started it. Most of it's digital, just because of the way it translates better. On occasion, I do a lot of watercolors in my sketchbook, and then I translate those. But I'm trying to expand, especially because as a teacher, I want to try and give my students like marketable skills, and I can't be like, well, this is how we did movable type, even though the New York Times hasn't had movable type since the early 80s. It's like, oh, we're going to set the type. You got to make sure it's backwards. Like, I want to actually show them stuff that's actually in there. Also, my students are like 5 to like 11, so like I'm not doing any major printmaking. We don't even have a kiln. I don't have a classroom. I don't have a sink. So I'm trying to show them everything that, like, the whole breadth of what artists are doing.
You have a classroom on a cart, right?
Oh yeah. Well, no, it's actually a box, because I have a cart, but I got 3 floors. Thank you, Thomas Edison. I only say that because when my building was the original schoolhouse, he wired this building as an effort to try and sell electricity to the people of the United States. And Polk School, I think then Lincoln School, was wired by Thomas Edison. And when I first started there in like 2008, you turn on the fans and all the lights would go out, or the computers would turn off. So I know it's not really his fault. We've rewired the building at least twice since he's died, but I still blame him. So influences is probably Willie Cole, who's I want to say he's a New Jersey-based artist, but he's actually like a Texas-based artist. He goes between New Jersey and Texas. From Somerville, New Jersey, had his studio originally in Newark, New Jersey, and uses a lot of multiples in his work. When he was a young man, he got a studio downtown Newark, and it was an old shoe factory. So there were just piles of women's shoes everywhere, and he incorporated those into his sculptures. He literally used them as the raw material for his work, and some of this stuff is just absolutely stunning. He also does things with water bottles and all kinds of other materials, and all of his work has a lot to do with the juxtaposition between American life and like African American culture and African American diaspora in general. He has an amazing piece at the Montclair Museum of a giant iron. And so I take a lot of inspiration from him. He's another one of those artists I try and push onto my students as well. I know he's got a piece outside the New York Museum. He has some pieces in the New York Museum. Who else? Tom Sachs is a huge influence on me. He has more to do with the technique of what I'm doing. He's very, he likes to take the ideas of things and take them to their inevitable conclusion. This is a man who came up with this idea of like, going a homemade, handmade space program, and then he stages these large scale, I want to say pretend, but they're kind of almost so realistic that they're almost like real expeditions to another planet. Like Mars, and they'll literally like take chunks out of the floor of wherever they're performing and say those are moon rocks and stuff. So he's a big influence on me as well. And then probably Steve Powers, who's a sign painter and former graffiti artist. And I take a lot of the inspiration for like humor in my work from him. He's very poppy like I am, but he's way more clever than I am. And also way nicer than I am. I've met him in person. I would not recommend you to don't meet your heroes, except if your heroes are Steve Powers. He's super nice, and he will offer to come to your school and teach your students. And actually, Willie Cole was super into the idea as well. But then the pandemic happened, and we never really reconnected. That's on me. I have his email. He answered it right away. I really got to get him on Zoom. Yeah. No, it's not a bummer. I'm not retiring anytime soon. We're good. There's a lot of artists that I find really inspirational, but those are like the top three I think like influence my work probably the most. It's hard to determine those because I feel like I have such a loose definition of what art is. Like I was thinking of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Yes, I know Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Yes, a puppet show made by two British people. That's really trippy. Of course, that's probably where I stole your idea from. What? You're some kind of thief? Yes, just like Picasso, world's greatest artistic thief, Pablo Picasso. He's like, wow, George Brock, what are you doing? I'm just going to do it twice as good as you. And that's really what happened. That's why I think of myself sometimes as a turd polisher. But definitely cartoons and industrial design definitely really play into what I'm doing. Probably less into the skulls and more into my painting work. Like pop culture. A lot, definitely the internet. For a while, I feel like all my art was like some form of like handmade meme. Back when in the before pre-QAnon, I guess, but where 4chan was not nearly as toxic as it is today. But alas, I basically take ideas from everywhere. Even my students and my own children, I'm constantly being like, oh, that's a really good idea. Like I was working on some new pieces because eventually when this comes down, I already have ideas of what I'm gonna do with these skulls. And one of my first graders walked up to me while I'm sitting during my prep and goes, you should make a 3D skull like that with the paper and glue it together and then you can cut it out just like you're doing with that knife. And I'm like, all right, Izzy, I'm gonna write that down. I'm gonna put your name right next to it so I know where I stole this idea from. That's a great idea. And I think part of the idea for the puppet came from my 10-year-old daughter. And I'm like, so, do you think it'd be weird if I made a puppet? She goes, can I watch you do it? Because I really want to see you mess it up because I think that'd be funny. It's like, all right. My 12-year-old was really like, yeah, I don't know what she goes. I think she started chanting, not she, they, my oldest child, then started chanting chaos, chaos. So, I clearly, I steal from children all the time. Them with their raw ideas and their hopes for their future and their low karmic debt. How dare you? I didn't even make the connection between myself, Boney, TM. That's a joke. Dave does not do copyright anything. He's irresponsible. And the, what's it called? Osobusco. Osa Grasse was the show I did a while ago, and was it here or was it at the main gallery? and it meant fat bone because I was making this little character that was basically like a chubby little dude who was also a skeleton. Because the idea of a fat skeleton was so funny to me. And I drew him basically totally aping the 1984, excuse me, how dare I, the 1986 Super Mario 3 box art, where Mario has a Tanuki suit and he's leaping. I was like, yeah, that's a great pose. I'm just going to steal that. And then I made a whole series of different characters, heroes and villains, all basically leaping. Some of those being, one of them actually being an ode to Steve Powers, where it's literally him in his flat top. I was part of my Art Goon series, him and Banksy, who I take no influence from Banksy at all. Except for, no, I guess a little bit maybe, but not on purpose. Definitely not on purpose. As much as I love Massive Attack.
I know, you let the secret out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I let the secret out?
The secret's out.
These pieces are all done on cigar boxes because I was kind of experimenting with different canvases because I really love this cigar box as a form, and also you can hide stuff inside them. And there's a few of these pieces that if you buy them, there's some little surprises on the inside for you that I will never show the internet because they're for you and for me. And but if you want to like Martin Shkreli it and buy them and then show everyone on your own feed, that's up to you. Again, like I don't know, as an artist, there's always a certain point of where like I want to do the best work, but I'm also like I don't want to spend all of my money on art supplies. So there's a really great cigar shop in Metuchen, and they sell their boxes for very cheap, and so I would go through them and get them every once in a while. And I'm going to say these pieces are old, meaning they're like 7 months old versus like some of these pieces in here that are like 4 weeks old. Although some of those things over there are like 6 years old. So those are like ancient to me. I produce a lot of work, which is starting to become a problem because I'm now swimming in it at home. Although actually I'm not swimming in it at home because it's all here now, but I was swimming in it. And I like the idea of taking something that's like kind of like cheap and basically a throwaway object and then kind of elevating it. These are all designed, with the exception of this one, Speed Kills, because it was designed for a show that I ended up could not be in. I couldn't be in it for one thing, and I wanted to experiment with the skulls and the boxes as well. They're all basically usable as boxes, even though they're able to mount on one nail anyway. There's just a hole in the back. Because I don't know, like I don't necessarily know what's going to happen to my artwork eventually when you buy it. So I want it to be as maximum usefulness as possible. And these are more indicative of my pop culture sensibility, mixing different patterns like this arabesque pattern in the back with my little cut-off thumbs. I don't know if I was thinking about the Yakuza or what, but like just the idea of like trying to show something visceral, but it's also kind of cute. Like, oh, they're cute little thumbs, but they're also like severed thumbs, which would be my nightmare. I would learn how to deal with it, but that would be my nightmare, to lose a thumb like that, at least like that. Also, I don't even think that's how it would look if it popped off, but it reads like a severed thumb from far away, which is really, that's what counts. Yeah. Like to me, like especially something like Ratfink over here, I like incorporating pop culture into my work because probably that little bit of that Warhol influence, the idea that like the mundane is also super important because it's part of our everyday life. I mean, I'm also really, really into like graffiti and sticker culture as well because as much as vandalism is terrible, there's a lot of experimentation that goes on the street that's not happened in the gallery. And sometimes the curator or whatever, the owner won't recognize that, but not always. So I kind of like how highbrow, lowbrow, I'm like, as I like to say, I'm hardcore middlebrow. Oh, the spray cans and the skulls kind of came out of the same time frame. I was really into this guy, Bill Barminski, who's a art professor and also a sculptor and movie producer. He produces like small, like a lot of music videos and stuff. And so he did this whole thing for the Beyond the Streets exhibition where he made a whole cardboard room. And I've been into his work for years. And he was making these little made-up spray cans. And he would make them so you'd shake them and they would rattle like a real one. I was like, oh, that's so cool. But like, why are they so small? Like, it would take just as much time for me to make a larger one. And also, it's easier to glue up. And so I would put like, I had a one piece where it was a skull with the spray can top on the top of it. And so I kind of made them at the same time because I really love cardboard and paper as a medium. They're readily accessible. They're essentially free if you know where you're looking, and can have an immense value if you know what you're doing with it. Like to me, it's like high art and engineering all put together. But all my spray cans are based on real spray cans. Bill Barmitsky, like he made all of his stuff kind of like whimsical. I was like, no, I've always wanted a Red Devil spray can. I'm just going to make one because I can't afford it, and I'm not going to go on eBay to buy things that are possibly going to explode on my shelf. And that kind of plays on the idea of like Tom Sachs's whole manifestation energy. So Tom Sachs, for a long time, would make these pieces that were based on objects that he felt he couldn't afford, because he thought like if he could build it, then eventually they would kind of manifest themselves. It's kind of like this artistic version of The Secret. So he would like make cameras and equipment out of them and basically sell them so he could afford the real thing. Because like, essentially because he made them out of plywood and screws and they were art, they were like somehow worth the actual Makita bandsaw. So I was like, oh yeah, I can't afford a wireless bandsaw, but I can build one out of cardboard and hopefully sell it to buy one.
That worked out.
Yeah, it really did. So I was like, hey, I can't afford all these skulls. Maybe I'll just build them. I mean, it's better than killing people and taking their skulls, right? Especially if you look at it, these are tiny. These are like smaller than baby skulls.
Oh yeah.
So I would be a monster. So, but I kind of like that idea. The idea of like, it's almost like voodoo or hoodoo or like the spiritualism built into the art world or into the artistic process. Even though I'm a staunch realist, I love conspiracy theories and cryptids and all that weird stuff, you know. Because every once in a while you're like, it's not a conspiracy, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact. It's not a cryptid, it's a panda bear, it's just you're racist and you don't believe Chinese people. like I know Bigfoot can't be real, and I'm telling you this as someone who really wants Bigfoot to be real. There's no scat. You can't have an animal that size. Like, I don't see rabbits very often, but I see rabbit poop everywhere. So what are these big feet doing, right? What are these Bigfoots, doing? Are they pooping in another dimension and then coming back? Are they like Harry Pottering it away?
Called big feet.
No, they're called Bigfoot. Bigfoots, yeah. Okay. I love the term big feet, but it's actually incorrect.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I want it to be big feet so bad. And every culture has some kind of like wild man myth, like the Yeti or the skunk ape or Sasquatch or the Wendigo. And they're all kind of built around the fear that people have about psychosis. Like the Wendigo is often like the Inuit would have this story where, maybe it's not the Inuit, it might be other Seattle or whatever, Canadian based Native American tribes that like, the Wendigo is like this giant, scary monster. And if you're familiar with like the 90s X-Men cartoon, he was like the main villain of Alpha Flight. And so, but the Wendigo in reality was this monster that basically was formed when people became cannibals, because it was so abhorrent, the idea that like you would eat your family members, that you had to be a monster. The idea that like possibly the idea of a werewolf is actually based on reality. It's not actually a man/wolf, but a person exhibiting the characteristics of a wolf, or basically like the way the middle-aged people were processing the idea of like an actual serial killer would be. So I want the Bigfoot to be real, but where's the scat? There's no hodag scat, there's no skunk ape scat, there's no Yeti scat. There's no Jersey Devil scat. So when I went to college, I took no painting classes. I was going to be a sculptor. I didn't need to worry about colors or anything. So in some ways, I'm like semi-self-taught when it comes to painting. And I work in a lot of collage. I like mixing. Because of that, I like using collage as a crutch for my inability to paint. So these are actually, these fish are actually from different chopstick wrappers that I will, if I take my kids out to eat, or if we get, I have a jar of those collected at my house of just the fish, and so I'm incorporating those into some of the paintings. This Mario with the heart head is actually kind of an ode to that previous Leap show that Frank and I were talking about, and to Boney in some ways. But to me, like I like using pattern. It's a really easy way of filling this space, but still having some meaning. I think it's a little funny that it's like a bunch of arabesque patterns made with Jewish stars.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just like I just couldn't help myself. I used to make those out of paper cuts for a really, really long time. And so I just thought like I'd bring them back into my paintings and stuff. And that seems to be like the part, when I'm showing my paintings, that's often what the painters I talk to are drawn to, are these weird patterns. They don't really seem to care about my Super Mario drawings. I don't know why. So this piece hanging here is called Memento Mori. This was an installation I designed for a performing arts fair in Staten Island, New York, and eventually made its way to Papillon and Company in Metuchen, New Jersey, where it was hosted there for a month. And the idea being I wanted to try and immerse people in the skulls because I thought it would be like a fun, so I'm shaking the whole thing, a fun way of interacting with the piece and also making it kind of performative as well. I'm not really sure how many people actually interacted with the piece or even saw the piece, but I was really happy with it. And I'm still pretty happy with it. There's about, I made over 1,000 skulls for this. I think only 900 made it onto strings. And then when I transferred it to Papillon, because the ceilings were lower, I definitely snipped the bottoms of the original 19. I like cut a lot of the strings in half to do it. So I probably lost a couple hundred, but I'm really proud of this piece. It's really interesting. But a lot of the pieces on the wall came from the pieces that I didn't really feel like I could put back on the strings. And that's kind of where I started from there. But, you know, everything I do is kind of connected because I don't want to have any wasted time or wasted motion. Because time is finite and I have things to do. I mean, I wanted to try and make it so it was like an overwhelming amount of skulls where you could not ignore the piece as a whole. Like and I'm saying the piece, I'm talking about Catacombs, the exhibition, curated by Frank May. Produced by David LaMorte. I wanted to be overwhelming because I feel a little overwhelmed by the artwork itself, and I thought it would be a really interesting experience to try and do that in the space itself. And honestly, like, if it wasn't for time, I probably would have produced even more of these. I mean, there's still wall we could have covered, Frank, and I feel, and I kept threatening my kids, telling them like I was going to make them help me do this, and I never did. And I think actually I probably could bribe them to help me finish this. Oh, probably only like I said 6,000 the other day. I bet if it's 2,000, I'd be surprised. And I was keeping track for a time, and then I gave up. It was too much. I wrote on each of the sheets that Frank put up how many skulls were on each sheet, but then I lost track of the amount of sheets and then how much was on each. And also, the other problem is that when you start changing the size, it greatly reduces the amount of skulls you can fit on those sheets. So there's some sheets that have like 50 on there, and there's some that have like 100, and it's kind of ridiculous to figure it out. Same thing with the strings. Like originally, these were 19 foot long, and then I had wrapped around little battings so that I can keep track of them, but I've had to snip them to fit them in Papillon, and then and so some of these are the remnants of those, and some of these are the original, so I really can't keep track of them. I need child labor to come in here and help me count these. I'll make it worth their while. I mean, I feed and clothe them as it is, but not other people's children. I'm talking about my own children. So I originally built a wire grid system, and I just thought it was going to be too hard to hang because where Papillon was, like in Staten Island, we taped them directly to the wall, and that was a nightmare for its own reasons. And then I hooked them onto this drop ceiling in Papillon. And I thought we could be able to pull that off here, and it wasn't going to work. But this kind of worked out nicely when Frank was just trying to set them up. He's like, oh, they kind of look good like this. It also gave me a space to put the ones that kind of don't fit into the piece as well on the floor underneath here without having to risk anyone like knocking them over or stepping on them or kicking them. Frank likes putting art on the floor. I can answer that. This is a coping strategy. No, in all seriousness, it's just to take this artistic idea to its inevitable conclusion, whatever that conclusion is. And I'm not saying like, oh, I know I have I have no grand plan for any of this. I'm not like one of those artists who feels like I'm going to make my masterpiece, because the real value of an artist is their ability to make art. Like, you could talk about Picasso, this, that, or the other thing, and those guys have individual paintings that I think transcend their abilities, or their almost transcend their personhoods because of the way they changed history. I think in this postmodern world, I don't know if that is going to happen ever again. Maybe, it's probably not to me. So I'm just trying to see where I can take this idea and go with it and run with it and see where it's going to take me. Yeah, in about 2008, I started making skulls in these little matrices. Not this size. They would actually be a lot bigger. Not the skulls. The matrices were a lot bigger. And I was using those as the backdrops for paper cuts that I was exhibiting pretty regularly at this gallery called LITM in Jersey City, and sometimes in other spaces, Shua Space, which is now, all these spaces are gone, so it doesn't even matter. It's just like, I wanted to kind of create these as bas relief, because even though like I was creating a lot of drawing, I still felt like I should be a sculptor. Like, part of me always feels like I should be working with tools rather than paintbrushes. Like when I was in college, I spent more time at Home Depot than I ever would have in Pearl. I love going to Pearl Paint, but I was always like, well, I need to go get some really shallow drywall screws. What am I going to do with all this paper? And so this is my kind of attempt to bridge that. And then I kind of started making these the way I always had done them, where these are all glued to each other. I don't think there's any backing. There might be a couple strips to these for the sake of time, and there's definitely some hanging hardware that I built out of cardstock, but these are all just glued to each other. Whereas the wall of skulls, they're all glued to a piece of paper. And I was like, this is going to take forever, because I have to glue these, I have to clip these, I have to let these dry. These are a way different, this is a way different animal than those pieces over there. And so I was experimenting with different sizes, different materials. Like this painted one here, I was doing, I teach a clay class over the summer, and we don't have a kiln, so we paint all our air dry clay with acrylic. And these kids would go through so much acrylic because you can't have them squeeze it out themselves. I've seen that disaster. And so I would fill out the paint trays, and whatever was left, I would kind of scrape out onto these pieces of paper, and I would kind of make these ink blot kind of designs that I was like, oh, I should make them into the skulls. That'd be really funny. And I have a few more of these hanging at my house, but I felt like this one was the one that kind of hit me the hardest, because there's so much intricate abstraction that happens just from the happenstance of where the paint mixed and didn't mix. And it shows some of the paper through it. It has a totally different feel than the other pieces. It's so much so that I didn't include any of these other skulls in this project. And I made a lot of those, but I was just, no, I wanted to keep them kind of more solid color, because you can really get the nuance of the form and line and stuff with the solid colors. Like even some of these are, like the red ones as well. Like I started doing these actually right after Halloween. Ironically, my 10-year-old daughter was like, hey, why don't you make like witches out of them and zombies? I'm like, what? She goes, yeah, why don't you try making other things? Because I've been trying to make paper hearts, trying to move away from the skull. And that's something my girlfriend, Magdalene, has been trying to encourage me to do. But I haven't figured out the engineering in a way that works for the way I work. It's just, I don't want to keep relearning how to build this thing from scratch every time. I want these to be a design element of a larger piece rather than an individual, like, persnickety little thing that I'm working on all the time. I don't want to have to relearn how to make it every time. So I was like, Well, I don't know. So she helped me develop a witch character, and then these are the demons, I call them. They're little devils. They're basically skulls with horns. And it shocks me that it basically took from 2009 to 2022 for me to even think to do this. Like, why did I was literally just staring at these for years. And so this is a matrices that I made using the skulls. And some of I think one or two of the skulls in the heart might actually be a demon, but I might have cut the horns off because I didn't want to, cross the streams. But right now I have a troll, I have an alien, I have a skull, and I have a demon that are all basically, I'm kind of using them almost like paper taxidermy. There is a witch that my middle child, my daughter, helped me develop, but I'm not happy with the hat. The face she came up with is great. But I want to make the hat more three-dimensional, like an actual cone. So that's kind of still in the works. But there's definitely one of them, if you come to the show, you can actually find it underneath the ladder. It's definitely in there. There's one or two of them still in there. I can show you something.
Can you show us the pedestal pieces?
I don't have thumbs. Okay. So this is a pile of skulls because Dave makes piles just like Frank. They went to the same art school.
We're both pile people.
Their conditioning was conditioned. So this is like a little cloche that I found at a store. And there's an artist, actually, a huge influence on me lately is this artist, Caitlin McCormick. And she's probably the only artist I'm going to mention who's like significantly younger than me. She's like 35, I think. She just had a birthday. I should know what her birthday is. And she makes these amazing, Philadelphia-based, she makes these amazing cloth sculptures where she basically like crochets the sculptures out of yarn and string, and then she paints them and adds glue to them. And in the words of Willie Cole, by any means necessary, makes these little pieces. And she makes a lot of them in these cloches because of the nature of the material, they gather a ton of dust. So I was like, oh my God, I should make like a pile of skulls out of this. So I had to make them teeny tiny. These are like the size of my thumbprint, the way these skulls are. And I have a few of these on sale at M Galleries PNA and at the Afero Gallery in Newark. And I just love the idea of like, they're almost like little specimens. And like the origins of a lot of this artwork, especially with my multiple, the idea of just like, make the thing and just throw it in a pile on the floor is something Frank and I have been doing since 2005? No, 2004. 2004, yes, where we would just build piles of things, and we're like, I made the thing, you figure it out, right? As I think you said, it's like, I'm the artist, it's the curator who has to figure out the other stuff. Just make the thing, Dave, and let the curators figure it out. You're not an art restaurator. You don't have to worry if it falls apart. Who cares? Everything falls apart. So I was like, and I bought these cloches, I think, at Dollar Tree. I bought some real ones. I haven't used any of those yet, because those have actual like wooden bottoms to them, and they're like glass, and they're not attached. Like they don't really. It got me thinking a little bit about looking at them almost like art objects in themselves. But it's hard for me to justify selling a little skull to someone as is, because I don't really know how they're going to display it. Is it going to look like? I don't want necessarily my artwork to look like trash. Even if the person who bought it gave me $5 and walked away with it, and it was like, yeah, whatever. They can crumple it up and throw it out for all I care. It's their work. I mean, it's their art. I made the art. I can't control what happens to it. But the artistic tyrant in me was thought like, oh, I should come up with a really nice way of displaying these. And so I kind of rigged up I don't think it's a bamboo skewer. It might be a stirring stick, actually, or a very thick bamboo skewer. And I mounted it right in the center so you can kind of see it and kind of see it in full 360. Yeah, because all these, normally they're mounted to the back, so you really don't see the back. That's kind of where the hard work's hidden. But this way you can actually see the whole thing, which I was really excited. Normally when I do a show with Frank, you kind of build this catalog of the artwork, and like, it's very professional looking, but I also kind of like the idea of having like an actual like catalog that has the form of a magazine that you kind of flip through. So I built one on my own, like very quickly. Boney, my lovely assistant's gonna hold it up. It's hard because like my thumb and my index finger are, here we go. Here, Boney, it looks like you're hugging it. Almost every show I think I've done here, we've had a zine that kind of culminated with it. I numbered them, there's only 10 of them. This is number 6, and it explains the show a little bit. It has a sample of the artwork, but the idea is kind of like a periodical about the piece, like my own little magazine all about what I'm doing. And there's a lot of artists who make zines who as their primary artistic influence or artistic, whatever you call it, media. And I just think it's fun, the idea of like having a little magazine that's all about the show that's like the ephemera of the artwork, because once the show is over and everything's taken down, all we have are going to be the documentation of the pieces, or if you bought a piece that you got to keep it with you, or in this video. So essentially all of that with, I mean, essentially the artwork, but I'm now realizing that the artwork included is the ephemera, the evidence that gets left behind, right? Like the idea of like, that I had the newspaper from September 11th, the New York Times and the Star Ledger for, I don't know, 20 years. I think I literally just recycled them the other day. Or like I had when Obama was elected, I kept that because I was going to paint a giant version of that. You know, like these ideas, these like things that are like throwaway things, especially made out of paper, are ways of like capturing those memories. It's also very DIY and punk rock because I feel like that's kind of a very New Jersey thing. There's a lot of the huge underground, especially when we were kids, people having basement shows and shows at VFWs and people having magazines, because it was the only way before the internet that we could actually exchange ideas in a way that where you didn't have to actually meet someone in person. So this zine is also part of the show as well. I'm David LaMorte, this is Boney, hello, and we're here at M Galleries P&A for my exhibition CATACOMBS from January 1st, 2023 to January 31st, 2023. Definitely feel free to come by and check it out and spend some time thinking about artwork and thinking about our relationship to life, death, and the hereafter.
Yes.
My shoulder hurts.